What's up guys and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled El Paso, America's largest downtown ghost town. I've definitely heard about El Paso before. El Paso is in Texas, right? El Paso, Texas. And I did not, what do you mean ghost town? I thought that this was like booming. I don't know. Without further ado, let's see what this video is about.
100 years ago, El Paso was a boomtown. But that was a long time ago. In America, we've become accustomed to abandoned downtowns, not only along derelict main streets in Middle America, but also in mid-sized and even big cities too. I recently went to America's 23rd biggest city, El Paso, Texas, and what I found may just be the largest ghost town downtown you or I have ever seen.
What? But El Paso, Texas, what? Even the name sounds like, you know, El Paso. Like, that should be, like, booming.
You'll find here is bleak. Vacant skyscrapers, boarded up storefronts, broken windows, graffiti-covered facades, empty parking structures, and ghost signs everywhere. But what you also have in downtown is a walkable street grid developed during the late Victorian era, as well as some of America's most unique architecture and walkable access to a foreign country from the city center. The truth is, downtown El Paso has slowly been withering away since at least the 1970s. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the city of El Paso developed several blueprints that were supposed to bring downtown back from the dead, or at least reverse the trend. A block-by-block approach to transforming the urban core into a dynamic, mixed-use destination that generates local jobs and high-quality housing. Economic growth fueled by historic preservation, better land use, better urban design standards, a targeting of underutilized parcels for dense, mixed-use infill. It's been a steep uphill battle, and today, the city and its residents can't even decide what to do with the place anymore. Downtown El Paso faces severe...
Easy. Just open up a bunch of stores, and then boom. And maybe make like a few communal areas so people come there and sit around, and that's it.
Vacancy, extreme fragmentation of private land ownership, substandard housing conditions, and an overall long-term decline in the actual downtown resident population.
Okay, this doesn't look very good. What?
So how does a city go about reversing decades of private sector disinvestment and simultaneously expanding the municipal tax base? Well, the answer is they don't. The sweeping historic preservation, the better land use, the new mixed-use infill, it never really happened. But how exactly did the city get here? How did El Paso rise to the highest heights and fall so far in the end? The first thing you have to know about downtown El Paso is that it is the closest big city downtown to the Mexican border, a literal walk away from the sixth largest city in Mexico, Juárez. The second thing you have to know is that Juárez is one of the most dangerous cities in North America. But from the Spanish colonial period all the way up until the end of the Mexican-American War, Juárez and El Paso were actually the same settlement. The official international border drawn along the Rio Grande in 1848 resulted in the land north of the...
Also, this grid, like, this looks so crazy. What even is this? Look at how, like, there's like a block. Oh, you can't see my mouse. But on this side, there's like a block that's completely different to the rest of the grid. Why? That's so weird.
River becoming American territory and the land south remaining part of Mexico. But even though the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo divided up the land on paper, a cross-border economy had already been established for decades, and that wasn't changing anytime soon. The settlement continued to develop as one well into the late 1800s. The settlement even continued to go by the same singular name, El Paso del Norte. That was until around 1888, when the name El Paso caught on in America, and the name Juárez caught on in Mexico. The American city was small at the time, a population of only 200 in 1850, 400 in 1860, 700 by 1880. This was the city's Wild West era, a small, isolated settlement of gambling, shootouts, drinking, and prostitution. It wasn't until the arrival of three major railroads, the Southern Pacific, Texas and Pacific, and the Santa Fe, respectively, when El Paso's population exploded. The city grew by over 1,500% by the 1910 census to around 15,000 residents. The railroad brought in all kinds of people seeking opportunity in the new frontier. Black and Chinese railroad workers, farmers and ranchers from the North, Midwest, and Great Plains, and Mexican laborers from the South fleeing the war-torn streets, a broken economy, and a divided government during the Mexican Revolution of the 1910s. The sudden growth brought economic prosperity and new infrastructure,
I love the way this looks.
but also a complex social and demographic change. What developed in El Paso was something like a dual downtown, an Anglo-American city center in the north, built by a booming frontier economy, complete with competing railroads, hotels, saloons, stagecoaches, shops, and streetcar lines. And on the south side, near the border, a Mexican city center called Chihuahuita. It was a dense neighborhood of tenements, cinemas, theaters, mercantiles, nightclubs, and adobes. By the year 1920, El Paso grew out of its rougher Wild West roots and into a more cosmopolitan place of commerce and capital. A naturally segregated city of Americans and Mexicans. And over 100 years later, that divide remains. When I was visiting the city, I found myself wandering from the American city center into the Mexican city center and back into the American city center. A fascinating juxtaposition to experience in person. Back in 1926, the economies of El Paso and Juárez were extremely intertwined. In essence, they were still one. Maybe the most telling example of this is how the streetcar system extended over and across the international border without limit. I mean, imagine that. An international streetcar system. Downtown El Paso developed a golden horseshoe, commercial prosperity anchored by department stores, corporate offices, and tourism around the central plaza, extending along two streets, El Paso Street and Stanton Street, through Chihuahuita and into Juárez. The built environment was changing from Victorian storefronts into Art Deco 5 and dime stores, and Pueblo Deco towers. In the center of the horseshoe, you could find things like municipal buildings, like the grand old post office, and a plethora of large warehouses. But this era was a double-edged sword. It was the beginning of the city's golden age, but it was also the beginning of the city's history of organized crime. During American Prohibition, Mexico's first cartels were created to smuggle opium, morphine, alcohol, and marijuana across the free-flowing international border into El Paso. The 1930s, 40s, and 50s would go on to define El Paso as we know it. The 30s saw a mass repatriation of Mexican and Mexican Americans back across the border. The 1940s saw the Bracero program, which was brokered by the US and Mexican governments to allow Mexicans to work in America legally due to the American labor shortages during and after World War II. The idea was that Mexicans could cross the border, get hired on temporary contracts, while at the same time sending money back to Mexico and eventually returning back to Mexico, stimulating their economy. But what ended up happening was that American companies, especially in border towns like El Paso, weren't providing the necessary wages and temporary housing required under the program. American corporations skirted the program and actually resorted to hiring illegal immigrants instead, incentivizing even more border crimes, and resulting in mass deportations under Operation Wetback in the 1950s. Mexican nationals were fleeing to America and staying and spending money there instead of returning. This really broke down US-Mexico relations and hurt the city of Juárez long term, so much so that they forced it.
I didn't know that El Paso was at the border though. I thought that El Paso would be like in the middle of Texas.
And to the international streetcar line in 1973. The following year, El Paso cut their half of the system. Throughout these tumultuous decades, El Paso developed into a three-pronged city. Majority white American suburban sprawl, a downtown that catered to the increasingly Mexican immigrant population, and an equally prosperous drug smuggling network carried out by the border crossers. But El Paso's and Juárez's local economies were still so interconnected, even through these decades, that whatever ended up happening to one ended up affecting the other. So in the 1980s, when Mexico's economy collapsed into a severe debt crisis and the country heavily devalued its currency, the purchasing power of Juárez residents plummeted, and so too did the local economy within downtown El Paso. Businesses were collapsing left and right. But that wasn't the end of the decay and abandonment, it was the beginning of the end. The final nail in the coffin for El Paso came in the 1990s, when President Bill Clinton signed into law NAFTA. Corporations no longer wanted to assume the risk of hiring illegals inside the US, and the North American Free Trade Agreement opened the floodgates for large-scale international manufacturing and trade, most notably with Mexico. NAFTA spurred the outsourcing of tens of thousands of El Paso's manufacturing and apparel jobs back into the maquiladora plants of Juárez. And even today, the city of El Paso, the state of Texas, the country as a whole, is still feeling the effects of that colossal blue-collar job loss. It was a play for corporations, by corporate lobbies. It either bankrupted what little was left of manufacturing and textile in El Paso, and if companies could survive, it was by utilizing cheap labor in Mexico to boost their bottom line. Not only could Mexicans no longer afford to spend money in Chihuahuita and El Paso like they used to, but now American workers couldn't afford to spend money either.
But El Paso also sounds like a very touristic place. I don't know. Maybe they don't have as much tourism. I don't know. Where do people go when they go to Texas then? Texas. I'm going to Texas. Oh. Texas is so huge. Where do you go? Wait. Where do people actually go when they visit Texas? What cities?
They were out of work. The economic situation, the drug trafficking, the high crime and constant closures, it was enough to kill downtown El Paso in the end. It wasn't just one thing or one person, but a snowballing of destructive policy, illegal activity, and disinvestment. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. And through the 2000s and 2010s, downtown El Paso couldn't experience the rebirth that downtown Dallas or downtown Houston or even downtown Austin could. It was just too close, too intertwined with Mexico and Juárez at the height of the cartel rule. On the urban planning front, the suburban sprawl that began during World War II was only made worse by that exact situation.
But these houses look nice. Like, these look like some expensive...
Americans living in urban core El Paso wanted to be as far away as possible from the drama at the border, and if that didn't mean leaving the isolated metro area altogether, it meant moving as far away from downtown as they could. El Paso isn't nearly as populous as Phoenix or San Antonio, but it's certainly just as sprawling. So what used to be the city's greatest asset a century ago, over time became its greatest weakness. The question is, will that ever change? Can it ever change? While anything is technically possible, the most likely answer is no. YouTube urbanists, historians, urban planners, city council members, they don't exactly like to admit things like that. I sometimes struggle to admit things like that. But when you consider everything about this city in the present day, all of these unique, long-term factors working against it, you come to realize that some things can't just be fixed with a 300-page urban planning outline. Now, El Paso will certainly be different in 140 years, just as it was 140 years ago when the railroad came into town. The only question is, what's going to be working for the city in 140 years? Or even in 40 years? Or even in 14 years? Even if El Paso somehow starts to attract several Fortune 500 companies, if it somehow regains a large domestic manufacturing base of both blue-collar and white-collar American workers, if northern Mexico somehow becomes so safe and so economically stable that it starts looking more like Scandinavia than Venezuela...
Is this on America's side? No, this looks like more like Republic Dominican or something, you know, like this looks like more like Latino American.
Well then, yeah, maybe people will want to invest in downtown El Paso. But these are miracles we're talking about here. Before downtown becomes somewhere people actually want to be again, before the streets are rebuilt for people and streetcar lines and parking structures are replaced with new urbanism, change is going to have to occur around El Paso. And sadly, most of that change is just not up to El Paso. It's national policy, international policy. But on this channel, we make a point of finding beauty and hope in urban decay and urban reinvestment. And I did find some of that here in El Paso. Of course, not every structure is completely abandoned. Adaptive reuse is a common experiment. When I was here, I stayed at the O.T. Bassett Tower, a 1930s office building turned Marriott hotel.
That's so
a fine
tall.
specimen of Pueblo Deco architecture, and really the golden age of El Paso's architecture and craftsmanship in general. This was the elevator waiting room, clad in granite and gold.
Crazy.
It can transport you up to the 15th floor and also back to 1935. I came to El Paso in the middle of a cross-country road trip. I explored the city for hours after I arrived, and I even found myself staying longer than I expected the next morning, exploring more of the city on foot, and even via vintage streetcar. If you can believe it, El Paso regained a streetcar system in the late 2010s. Like I mentioned earlier, El Paso had streetcars all the way back in the 1880s, electrified in 1902, but shuttered in 1974. They sat baking in the desert sun at a storage yard inside El Paso International Airport until they were finally taken out of retirement in 2018, when they were once again placed on the city streets. The system is completely publicly funded and completely free to ride every day of the week. It's actually
What? That's crazy.
better ridden than the streetcar systems in Atlanta and Oklahoma City. I'm only mentioning that because I've ridden both of those and have footage of both of them to include here. It's not like the numbers are super impressive or anything. The cars see about 1,300 riders every weekday. The relative popularity is likely due to the fact that its southernmost stop sits just a few hundred feet from the International Pedestrian Border Crossing. It's America's second closest light rail stop to Mexico after the San Diego Trolley. I made a video riding that entire system. I'll link it at the end of this one. The streetcars were built in the 1930s for the streets of San Diego, California, where they operated until they were bought by El Paso in the 50s. I guess El Paso hasn't lost its downtown so much as it's had it shrunken down to the size of a Texas town square, like something you'd see in a historic town off the interstate. It's not completely abandoned, only mostly. But once you get up here, you can find things like the El Paso Museum of Art, the History Museum, the Convention Center, the restored Plaza Theater, the El Paso Chihuahuas, the AAA affiliate of the San Diego Padres. I even stumbled upon a small artisan market while I was here. Even though I found the city on a road trip, you might find the city on a railroad trip. There's an Amtrak station here too, designed by Daniel Burnham, one of the greatest
That's
Beaux-Arts
pretty.
architects to ever live. It was built in 1906 as a Union station. Today, you can take the Sunset Limited towards Los Angeles or New Orleans, and the Texas Eagle towards Los Angeles or Chicago.
But this is confusing though, because
Anyway, I'll see you next week, right here, from 4th place.
this is confusing because first of all, I've heard about El Paso. Now the song "Gotta Have High High Hopes for a Living" na, 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 is playing in my head, but because they said that there's probably no hope, like it's not gonna change, but it has amazing transportation, apparently very good like walkability. It's I don't know. I think that it has a lot of potential, but I was not expecting to see that though. But yeah, either way, guys, thank you for joining me for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've been to El Paso. What do you think? Is it gonna be booming soon? Because it has it all. I don't get it. And yeah, thank you for joining. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video.